you. Okay, I think we can start. Good afternoon. So Raim Tovim, thank you. I really appreciate everybody coming. I know it's not our usual time, and therefore it's not going to be our usual topic. And as I wrote, we're going to do an introduction to the 613 mitzvot. Why exactly I chose a topic? I don't know exactly why. I guess Shavuos wasn't that long ago. I think it's an interesting topic, and different things have come up. So we'll see how far we get. And of course, if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay, so why don't we start? How do we know there's 613 mitzvot in the Torah? We're going to try to discuss the origins. What does it mean there's 613 mitzvot? Perhaps get to the different levels of mitzvot, not just biblical and rabbinic, but within biblical law, the different sources of mitzvot, etc. So, but why don't we start there? Why are there 613 mitzvot?
That's debatable.
It is debatable, as we're going to see, right? So this is parts of these things. What I'm going to say today, I think I've mentioned over the years my classes. So part of it is review, whatever, which I always love. And but we'll see. We'll put it all together. So as we see, the fact that there's 613 mitzvot is one of the best known things in Judaism. I think if you walked in the street and you asked even Jews who are not, you ask your typical Jew who shows up to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur 3 days a year, and you ask them how many mitzvot there are in the Torah, they'll tell you there's 613. I think, and most of them are going to know that. They can't tell you what Tekiyot the Meyushav and Tekiyot the Me'umad is, or what Malchut Zichronot or Shofar or they can't necessarily name the 5 tefillot on Yom Kippur, but they can tell you that we have 613 mitzvot. Everybody knows that. The problem is, it's everybody knows that, but until the 8th century, nobody cared about this at best. And as I'll mention now, there is no agreed upon list of 613 mitzvot. There's no list. There are lists of the 613 mitzvot, but they don't agree with each other. So we'll try to address some of that. But why don't we start at the beginning? So to the best of my knowledge, there are only 2 sources in rabbinic literature that in Talmudic literature that there are 613 mitzvot. So we'll start with the most famous one. I'll share my screen. We'll start with, let's just get it, the Gemara in Makot. This is the main source. Makot 23b. Masechet Makot is really a continuation of Masechet of Sanhedrin. And Sanhedrin, of course, talks about the court system. The court says 3:2371. The last half of the tractate talks about the 4 death sentences, how to carry it out. Even though in Makot, the Mishnah Makot tells us that the once in 7 years is a mean court to give it that penalty. Once in 7 years, Rabbi Kiva said he would have never. That's in Makot and Sanhedrin. You pretend, you read it. They're giving death penalties. Who knows all the time? So it goes through the last 50 pages. Pretty much talk about the 4 death penalties. The last chapter actually talks about all. I got into that's the basis of the 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. The last chapter in Sanhedrin says these are the people who have a share. Everybody has a share in the world to come. And these are the people who lose their share in the world to come. And it's on that Mishnah that the Rambam writes his famous 13 articles of faith. Makot is a separate tractate nowadays, but it was, I think the scholars say it was really used to be one long tractate, Sanhedrin and Makot. Makot are lashes, because one of the penalties the court gives, again, in theory, I don't think this was actually done so often, but there are 207 of the 365 negative mitzvot that we're going to get to, right? 207 of those carry the punishment of lashes of Makot, which are 39 Makot, and Masech Makot again deals with other topics too. Edim Zomim begins certain type of false witnesses, but it deals with the giving of lashes, especially on the 3rd chapter. It's only 24 pages or 23 pages. It ends on page 24. Every Talmudic tractate starts at page 2, so there's always one less page. There's no beginning to or ending. So this is really mamash towards the end of the Masechet, a teaching of Rav Simlai. This is the basic source of what we call 613 mitzvot. Darash Rav Simlai. Rav Simlai, if I'm not mistaken, lived in the 3rd century in Israel. He's a more living in Israel. Sheish meyot u'shlosh meyot mitzvot nemru lo leMoshe. There were 613 mitzvot that were told to Moshe. Shlosh meyot v'shishim v'chamesh labim. There's 365 lab negative commandments. Kiminyan yemot hachama. Just like there are 365 days in the year. The earth revolves around the sun every 365 days, more or less. So for every day of the year, there is a negative mitzvot. It's a very powerful idea that every day, focus on a different aspect. I mentioned once before that. So I believe it's in the Zohar. They list off dates. I've never seen this inside. I actually should get to see it inside because what they list off are the Hebrew dates. But of course, the Hebrew dates are not 365, only 354 or 384 if you're talking Adar Sheni. But let's say for Tisha B'Av, the mitzvah of Tisha B'Av is Eiver Min HaChai, and whatever. So each one of the days. But the concept 365 negative mitzvot, because there are 365 days in the year, somehow the mitzvot are connected, and this is a very Kabbalistic, Zoharistic concept, that the mitzvot we do, or the sin we do, have mystical, impact, and the celestial beings in the whole world, is impacted by the mitzvot. So sort of the earth revolves around the sun because we refrain from these 365 negative mitzvot. Okay. 248 positive. According to the limbs of the body, it also mentioned no one has yet been able to make a complete and accurate count what these 248 limbs are. We sort of know near 248. I don't think there's ever a listing. Eddie Reichman, in his recent books, fantastic book on medical ethics, has a whole chapter on this, the history trying to solve what exactly are these 248 limbs, but that's not our topic now. So again, 248 positive mitzvot, also very important of significance, because it means that it's all the mitzvot are interconnected. Just like our body, the heart, we have their major organs and less major organs, right? They're really important mitzvot, and they're less important mitzvot. We spoke last week. The Ten Commandments is more important than other mitzvot in the Torah. That's why it's in the Ten Commandments, so to speak, right? So they're vital organs and less vital organs, but still the body is one integrated whole, and our pinky is part of that whole system. So 248 positive mitzvot because there are 248 limbs in the body. That's what Rav Simlai says. Very nice, very nice. What it's waiting for the end of Masechet Makot, and why this has never been mentioned in the Mishnah. It's never mentioned in the Mishnah. We're now in the Gemara. So for sure, till the year beyond the year 220, nobody knew, or it's never recorded that there's 613 mitzvot. Then he doesn't give us a source. I'm a Rav Hamanuna. So how do you know? Where does he get this from? That where do they make this up? 613 is a very nice number. Where does it come from? Mikra. What's the verse? Interesting. So he wants to claim there's a biblical verse that backs up this notion of 613. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. This is towards the end of the Torah, Moshe's last speech, and this is in V'zot HaBracha, the beginning of V'zot HaBracha. Moshe commanded us the Torah, Morasha Kehilat Yaakov. It's a legacy, an inheritance to the Jewish people. So that's very nice. Where do you get 630 mitzvot? So Torah b'gematria, Torah in numerical values, the Taf is 400, the Vav is 6, and the Hey is 5, so that's 411. Reish 611. That's very nice. The word Torah is 611. Okay, great. So Torah tziva lanu Moshe Morasha Kehilat Yaakov. Moshe commanded us the Torah. But Torah, what's Torah? I somehow, when I read this verse, I don't think Torah means 611. But that's also a very strange idea that we're going to derive from the word, because the gematria of Torah was so Torah Moshe commanded 613. Okay, it's a hint. Maybe they had a tradition, whatever it is. But this is not exactly a direct verse in the Torah telling us this. But that's Rav Hamanuna. You can find a hint, a reference in the Torah. No, that gets us to 611. Wow, what about the other two? Anochi v'lo yeh lecha mipi gvura shma'un. So there is a tradition that the first two of the Ten Commandments were said by God. Anochi, and it's written in the first person. Anochi, I am the Lord your God, who took you out of Egypt. You shall not have any gods before me. That's God talking. By run number 3, by commandment number 3, it's lo tisad shem. You shall not take God's name in vain. That you can, there's a switch in the person, and that's based on this. I mean, based on the psukim. The Jewish said, wait, if you want to mute yourself, please. Otherwise, I'll have to stop sharing, which I'll do in a minute anyway. So by number 3, Moshe talking, and that's our tradition. Our tradition that the Jewish people got so nervous, and so they couldn't take the power of God. So they asked Moshe to speak, and therefore God spoke the first 2, and Moshe spoke the other 8, and then the other 603 regular mitzvot, 8 of the 10 commandments, 611, 2 from God. Okay, very nice, but not so nice. I mean, nice. I don't want to say it's not nice. Very difficult. So what are some of the difficulties in this teaching besides the gematria, the fact that we're doing this from a numerical source? Well, what makes this difficult? And I'll so you know what, maybe I'll jump the gun. Let me share my screen a second. I'm going to show you something pretty wild. I think it's pretty wild. I've mentioned this in the past, but let's see it inside. Hasagot Haramban. Okay, so let me stop my screen for a second. So as we know, okay, anybody know where you, okay, I said there's no exact list, there's no agreed upon list, there are lists. If you want to look for a list of the 613 mitzvot, you got so inspired by the shir, you want to memorize the 613 mitzvot. I tell my kids in chat, usually most years, I don't know if I told them this year, because it never will happen, never has happened, never will happen. If I tell the kids, if you can list off the 613 mitzvot, I'll give you 100 in the course. You can goof off the whole year. If you know the 613 mitzvot, you get 100. I say, you know what? Even if you get only 590, I'll give you, a break. You have to sit down in one sitting. All right, 590 mitzvot. I for sure couldn't do it. I don't know. I'm not sure how many. I don't want to say Gedolei Torah can't do it. I don't know how many people alive in the world today can do this. So Ricky said the Sefer Mitzvot of the Rambam, correct? That's the source. He's not the first source. It's the first source is the Bahag, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The Bal Halakot Gedolot. That's what is Yonah. We're not even 1,000% sure who he was. He was one of the Gaonim period, 8th, 9th century. He was the first one to list off the 630 mitzvot. The Rambam is probably the most famous listing. The Sefer HaChinuch is what I've mentioned many times, the best introduction to Judaism. If you're going to, I'll say something that we spoke how the Rambam said you only need one book in your life, 2 books. You need a Tanakh and the Mishnah Torah. That's the Rambam. So I'm going to say, if I'm going to accept the Rambam, which of course we don't, that you only need one other book in your library besides Tanakh, I'm going to say better than the Mishnah Torah, have a Sefer HaChinuch. You're only going to have one book in your library, make it Sefer HaChinuch, because then you'll have it brought over you 630 mitzvot. The Rambam, that's hard for most people to learn all the Mishnah Torah. But anyway, the Sefer HaChinuch though is really a copy of the Rambam. He just follows the Rambam's mitzvot. But what the Sefer HaChinuch does is he does in order of the Parshiot. So it's very easy. You look up every parsha, Balak, Chilkat, how many mitzvot there are, and so that's what we all know. In the book of Bereshit, there are 3. In Ki Teitzi, there's 74. The Rambam doesn't list them by chronological or biblical order. The Rambam listed. Nobody knows how the Rambam listed. We spoke last week, actually. See, everything ties into everything. The first belief in God, and there's only God is unified, and the love of God, prayer. We understand the first 10 of the Rambam, then it gets all complicated. Why does the Rambam go in this order? There have been PhDs written trying to figure out what the order of the Rambams of 613 mitzvot are. But again, that's not our subject for now, especially not in an introduction. So the Rambam wrote a list of the 613 mitzvot, and the Rambam had a real big problem. What was the big problem the Rambam had when he's writing the 613 mitzvot? His problem was, I'm sorry, there are more. There are 6 million mitzvot. Okay. I mean, how many mitzvot are there on Shabbos? There are 5,000 mitzvot on Shabbos. It depends. That's the problem. What do you mean 600? How in the world am I going to figure out 630 mitzvot? There's so many things that you has to do. So the Rambam lists off 14 principles 14 limiting principles. In order to be a mitzvah, it can't have any one of these four, or has to have whatever, which way you're looking at it, these mitzvot. So the first thing the Rambam says, it can't be a rabbinic mitzvah. That doesn't count. Rabbinic mitzvah doesn't count. That God gave to Moshe, that's in the Torah. That's a Torah mitzvah. So then the second one, which is gets rid of 99% of mitzvot. That's the first one. Okay, the rabbinic. So that gets rid of Hanukkah and Purim and all that other stuff. And Muksa. Okay. Then the Rambam gets rid of 98% of biblical law. How does he do that? So the Rambam says anything derived, anything that's not an actual text in the Torah. I'm not interested in what the rabbis derive from the text. If anything the rabbis derive from the text, reading between the lines, that's the vast majority of the Torah. That's the entire Talmud, reading between the lines of the Torah. So none of those count. If we have time, we'll discuss why none of those count. The Rambam doesn't count any of those in the Torah mitzvahs. It's got to be a verse in Torah. So, for example, that there are 39 forbidden activities on Shabbat, that's not mentioned in the Torah anywhere. That's the rabbis reading between the lines. The rabbi said, oh, Shabbat is written next to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the tabernacle had 39 activities to run the tabernacle. It must be on Shabbat. There are 39 activities. Very nice. But it doesn't say that in the Torah. And since it doesn't say that in the Torah, it doesn't count as a mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvot. The most important question that we'll see how much we discuss today, but to think about it, raise that again, another occasion is, so what? In other words, what does that mean? That means the 39 malachot are less important? In other words, what does it say in Torah? Zachor Yom HaShabbat Lekodsho. So that the Rambam says, therefore, there's a biblical mitzvot. It's interesting to make Kiddush. The Rambam interprets the word Zachor. Zachor doesn't mean to remember. It means to mention, to liskor, lahaskir, to say. So you have to say, you have to sanctify the Shabbat. How do we do that? We make Kiddush. So that's a biblical mitzvah. But or Shamor, you have to guard. Shamor, we can't do certain activities. I don't know what those activities are. Those are derived by the rabbis. But all the 39 activities, that's all one mitzvah of Shamor. So I don't, but what is, okay, so what does that mean? Why is that important? So the Rambam is faced with a very serious problem. Everybody's faced with a serious problem, is how do we limit the mitzvot? So by getting rid of anything the rabbis derive, that gets rid of literally 98% of what we consider biblical law. And we have to raise the question, is something derived from the Torah of lesser status? We know a biblical law is of great status in a rabbinic law. That's what's right at the beginning. Yes, we can be more lenient on a rabbinic law because a rabbinic law is less important than a biblical law, obviously. So the question is, and we know there's a hierarchy within biblical law. We know to eat on Yom Kippur is worse than to eat pork, So do we say that anything written in Torah is on a higher level than something derived from Torah? So that's an important question that people don't usually ask. I don't know. This stuff I don't think is taught in any yeshivas. I don't know. Did any of you learn any of this when you went to school? Was anybody taught any of this stuff? Okay. All right. I'm sorry to hear that.
Rabbi Kelman,
Yes.
according to the Rambam, so the 38 of the 39 malachos are midrabanan.
No, I didn't say that. I said no, we consider them biblical law. That's the question, is there a different status, but it's not one of the 613 mitzvot. So we haven't said, why does that matter? That's my question. Who cares? Who cares if it's one of the six? In other words, there are 5 million biblical mitzvot. So 613 of them get counted. So why is that important? Maybe it's not important, which is why maybe the Mishnah never mentioned it. Rav Simai is a nice idea. It was making a drasha. It's an agadata. You don't run or follow agadata. It's an agadic statement. There's no legal. We distinguish between halakha and agata. So then, right, these are the questions I am raising. Now there is one of the 39 malachot is mentioned directly in the Torah, and that is
Fire.
So that's a debate. Why is that mentioned alone? Some say to make it less important. Havar l'lav yatzad or l'chalek yatzad. I don't get into the technical halakhic discussion, but my point is, because it's mentioned and the other are not, it's different. The Gemara says that lighting a fire is different from the other 38 malachot. So we already see that if something's mentioned, that's how the rabbis understand it. If something is mentioned in the Torah, it's different than if something is not mentioned in the Torah. We have to figure out why and what. But I'm just going to raise a lot of the issue now. So let's go back to the Ramban, right? We're discussing Rav Simlai 613 because of this Torah Tzivel and Moshe, and 365, Torah 611, and 2 said by Moshe. So let's just the difficulty in this thing. So let's go to the Ramban. So the Ramban writes the Mishnah Torah, and he writes an introduction. His introduction is the 613 mitzvot, because the Mishnah Torah is an explanation of the 613 mitzvot. So the Rambam has to give you he has to tell you what the 613 mitzvot are. Before he does that, he tells you, here are my rules. Here are my rules for making the 613 mitzvot. No rabbinic mitzvot, no mitzvot that are derived, that are not mentioned explicitly in the text. No mitzvot that the rabbis interpret the text. We assume an interpretation of the text is a biblical law, but it's not one of the 613 mitzvot. So that's what the Rambam, so he goes through 14 principles like that. Those are the two most famous ones, mitzvah klali, different principles the Rambam has. Okay, now, or it doesn't apply for all time. That's why we'll get there later maybe. So the Ramban, of course, I mentioned there's no agreed upon this. So the Ramban disagrees in 31 mitzvot. The Rambam and the Ramban disagree in 31 cases. But even before we get to what they disagree, which we're not going to get to today, I don't think, the most famous disagreement they have is on the mitzvah of living in Israel, where the Rambam, Maimonides, does not count living in Israel as one of the 613 mitzvot. The literature written on that, especially in the Zionist world, the religious side. Wait a minute, how can the Rambam not count it? The most important mitzvah in the world is to live in Israel. How can it be? So all kinds of, there's a ton of literature written on that. It doesn't mean the Rambam doesn't hold it's a mitzvah to live in Israel, but he doesn't count it as one of the 613 mitzvot. The Ramban sharply disagrees. The Ramban was the greatest Zionist of all medieval authorities. But let's take a look how the Ramban, on this first of the 14 principles of the Rambam of how to limit the 603 mitzvot, what the Ramban has to say on this. As far as I just got this now, it is in English. Oh, Baruch, I didn't think it was in English. Okay, but I'm going to read it in Hebrew. Amar Rav Moshe Bar Nachman Zal Minu Regadati. So I am now in the Iberian Peninsula, which is where the Ramban was in Catalonia, which we today call Spain. But when the Ramban was alive, Catalonia was not part of Spain. The Ramban would not have thought that he lived in Spain. Today, it's one country, although there's a separatist movement there, if you follow the news a little bit. But he lived in the northern part of Spain. The Rambam was born in the southern part of Spain. Anyways, Catalonia. So, okay, so here, fine, he writes this introduction, though. Where is it? So now let's go. Okay, Ha'ikar Rishon, Mina Marmar Hishiv Harav Hagadol. The first principle that the Rav Hagadol, that is the Rambam, Zal al Bal Halachot Gedolot. Okay, so I'll get back to that. The term Shetchila de Bern Levavi Binyan Hazeh. Before I speak from my heart, Shetchila Bern Levavi Binyan Hazeh in this matter, Omar Shemasha Nista Pekli. I have to tell you what I'm in doubt about. There's something that I'm struggling with. I don't really know. So before I give a whole discussion on the Rambam and debate with him and analyze the 613 mitzvot, I have to tell you something that bothers me. Even though I know that the entire world, everybody in the world knows as the most basic teaching of Judaism. This is the Gemara. In the end of Makot, Darash Rav Simlai. The Rav Simlai says there are 365 negative mitzvot and 248 mitzvot. And Rav Hamanuna said it's derived from the verse Torah Steve Moshe. Everybody knows that. Hikshua Torah Torah Anochi fine. Inei. I have to skip that part. Every wise scholar, the average person, like I said, walking on the street to shul on Yom Kippur night, ask any Jew how many mitzvot are in Torah, they'll tell you 95% will know there's 613, even if they haven't been in shul since last year on Yom Kippur. Mitzvot. Beneath Kabrubo, Shirot, the Piyutim, Vazarot, Nimim. There are all kinds of poems. Rav Sadia Gaon wrote a poem with the 613 Piyutim mitzvot that they, all kinds, Shirim, Piyutim, Vazarot, beautiful, about what the 613 mitzvot. Mehem lechachmei Sfarad Rabot, Beretz Andulas, Andalusia, Kasher Hiskir Harav Zal Me'embar Tzarach Harod, B'chopin Onakola. Anywhere in the diaspora, everybody writes, everybody talks about the 630 mitzvot. And B'kvar Mar Harav Shezed Davar Shelo Yisakel to Achad Mikol Mishana mitzvot. There's not even one person of all the hundreds of people who list the mitzvot, right, who made all these songs and things, but not one of them thought they were not 613. It's like a weird number. Like if you what are the odds? Like 613, like right? So every single person agrees there are only 630 mitzvot. But me, Mr. Ramban, Rav Moshe ben Nachman, living in the 13th century in Catalonia, Allah belibi safek. I don't know. I'm not sure. Memra. Im hidi v'rekol is first of all, Rabbi Menuna says it. What does Rabbi Akiva say? What does Rabbi Shmuel say? What does Rabbi Yehuda Nasi say? Rabbi Simon is a very nice rabbi. Remember, he's not like if I'm going to ask you who are the most 10 famous Talmudic rabbis, he's not going to be on your list, right? So oyesh b'machloket. Maybe 100 other rabbis they disagreed. That's one doubt. V'sapek acharim halach ala Moshe miSinai. Another, it was this idea that the 613 given to Moshe. Moshe. In other words, Moshe was told, I want you to know, here's the Torah. There's 613 mitzvot here. Kach mitzvot ani moser, I'm giving you. Oh, asmachta b'alma. No, it's just an asmachta means you have a pre-existing law or a pre-existing idea, and you look for a verse that gives you a hint, but the verse doesn't teach you the verse. You know the law and you go back to find the verse. That's what we call an asmachta. I'm leaning my learning on something, but that's not what the verse really means. Just it's a hint. Some say it's a mnemonic device. It reminds me, Torah 613, but that's not where I learned it from. That he found this, etc. Okay. Well, I'll tell you why. One of the reasons I don't know if this is true. There are many arguments if something is obligatory or something is not obligatory. We don't have to go through them all now. He points out here, Rabbi Akiva says it's a mitzvah, Rabbi Yishmael says it isn't a mitzvah. So he quotes three examples. Asota, what's the other? By slaves, interesting, and Tuma. That's the one that is pertinent to us. Is a Kohen obligated to be tameh for a relative? We know that a Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with a dead body, but we also know he is allowed to come in contact with a dead body if it's one of his 7 relatives. So the question is he allowed to or is he obligated to? So Rabbi Akiva says he's obligated to. That's a mitzvah in the Torah, to impurify yourself. And Rabbi Shmuel, no, it's not a mitzvah. The Torah allows you. So the Ramban is bothered by the fact, so why does the Gemara not say, according to Rabbi Shmuel, now we only have 612 mitzvot, or 610, he gives 3 examples. And then, because the Gemara does it all the time. When you learn Gemara, he learns this from this verse. What does he learn from? He learns that from that verse. So how does this first person learn that idea? He learns it from another thing in that verse. So what does the second person do? What does he do with that part of the verse? And the Gemara goes back and forth trying to figure out what everybody's learning from the verses. So I don't get it. On such a basic idea, why is the Gemara never, ever bothered? Why does the Gemara never say, whoa, according to Rabbi Yishmael, we don't have 613 mitzvot. What mitzvot does he add? Because he says this is a mitzvah. The Gemara never, ever did that. So that's why the Ramban is in that. He goes on. We don't have time now to read the whole thing, but I didn't even realize it was in English. I'll just share again. But you go on Sefaria, I think. Where is it? The English shows up. You know what? This part isn't in English, right? That's what I thought, right? Just as introductions in English. Okay, right? They didn't do the whole thing in English. Let me see here. I don't know, you can check maybe. Yeah, this part is in English, but none of the rest is in English. Yeah, they don't have it in English. Okay. Anyways, okay. So that's one problem. There's a second problem with this Gemara, we'll say. Torah Tziva Lenu Moshe. So there's a cute problem, okay? How do we get that? Torah 6:11, and God said the first 2 commandments. So we know, of course, I know I say the 10 commandments, but we know that's, of course, a misnomer. It's called the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 sayings. Why is it not called the 10 commandments? Why are the 10 commandments? What's wrong with calling it?
Because there are more than 10 in there.
because there are more than 10 commandments in the 10 commandments. That's kind of cool. Like when was the War of 1812? Right? How many commandments in the 10 commandments? I think the Sefer Chinuch is 14 commandments. And guess what? The first two, I think, have 4. What we call the second, and there's a debate. Oh, so even if God said the first 2, quote unquote, that's the first 2 dibrot, but that's not the first 2 mitzvot. That's 4 mitzvot, right? And Shabbat, and even if Moshe said 8, hold on, Moshe said 9. He may have said 8 dibrot. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat is 1 mitzvah. Sheichet Yemim Tavo, but see, Lo Taseh Malacha Tav Mincha B'Tcha, whatever. That's the positive Zachor. And Shamor, forget the Shamor later on in the second step, but work for 6 days and rest on the 7th day. That's the negative. So the mitzvah of Shabbat has 2 commandments. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense. In other words, it's the Gemara is combining mitzvot and dibrot, and they're not the same. In other words, the first, even if it's true, the first 2 dibrot were said by God, that doesn't make it 6, 11, and 2. It just makes it 6, 0, 9, and 4, or whatever. That's a B. What do you mean God only said the first thing? That's Rashi's view. That's a big machloket. I think the Ramban himself, I didn't have time to check now, but I'm pretty sure it's the Ramban who disagrees. Says, no, God said all 10. If you look in the Torah, the people come to Moshe after the 10 commandments. And so Rashi say, okay, it happened in the middle, but the Torah didn't want to interrupt the asserted dibrot. Whatever it is, the whole thing is very, is it only going according to the opinion of Rashi? So that's a very strange idea of where we're learning from. So you could say again that that's why Rav Simlai didn't give that limud Torah. He just said it on his own. Rav Amnuna is coming along. So it's an asmachta. If it's an asmachta, no, it's not really what the verse means. So it doesn't have to be exact. The idea, you can sort of give it teretz, you can kind of kvetch something out, but it's clear that's not the clear meaning of the verse. I think the greatest difficulty of all is the continuation of the Gemara, which is, I've shared this Gemara. I don't know when the last time I shared it online with everybody here. Maybe I never did, but it's probably, in my mind, the most difficult Talmudic passage there is. It's kind of like the most difficult Rambam there is that the Rambam says, I remember in high school already, one of my high school Rebbeim told me, all the difficult Rambams, all the Rosh Yeshiva spent, and Rav Soloveitchik spent his whole life answering difficult Rambams, is the most difficult Rambam is how can the Rambam say, the chutzpah of the Rambam to say you need only 2 books. My book is the Mishnah Torah, you need a Torah, and my book and no other book. That I remember one of my high school Rebbeim said, that's the most difficult Rambam. Forget all the other Rambams. How can the Rambam say such thing? So this is a Gemara that's like mind-boggling. So the Gemara began, Rav Simlai says there's 613 mitzvot. Yeah, not really. That's the Orthodox Jews. That's the ultra or the old-fashioned Jews. The modern Jews, David HaMelech, it's only 3,000 years ago instead of 3,500 years ago. But David, he said there are only 11 mitzvot, not 6. He made only 11 mitzvot. And we went through this once, actually, I believe. And if you keep going, let's see, where are we here? Yeshayahu said, there are only 6 mitzvot. Hamidan al-Sheis, there are only 6. And it goes through what they are. And Micha comes and there are only 3. There are only 3 mitzvot. And forget 613, right? This is a little bit famous. Micha's idea is a little famous. What is God? What's good? What does God want from you? God only wants 3 things. Asot mishpat, do justice. Love kindness. Don't you do justice and you love kindness. Obviously, if you love kindness, you'll do kindness. And be modest. That's all. That's what God, he doesn't ask you to keep kosher. Doesn't ask you any of this other stuff. Just ask you these 3 things, right? So this is wild. Now, if you don't believe what I'm saying, because I don't believe what I'm saying either exactly, although that's what it sounds like the Gemara says. So we'll take a look at Rashi. Let's see here. I got to move this thing here because it's blocking. I know you can't see it, but I don't think you can see it. Let's say Rashi. So Rashi says something unbelievable. I'll read it in Hebrew so you won't believe me. Okay. So David HaMelech came and he made 11 mitzvot of the 613. Shevet Chila Hayut Tzadikim. The people in the desert, you know how righteous they were. They never complained about anything. You know, the Jews that they left Egypt, they were amazingly pious. Right? Okay, they could accept many mitzvot, and there are high moments, right? The Jews, the Nasev and Nishma, unbelievable people, they could accept everything. They saw so many miracles. About Dorot Achronim, the weaker generation, they weren't so righteous. If you're going to ask people to keep 613 mitzvot, tafasta meruba lo tafasta, right? That's an expression. If you ask for too much, you get nothing, right? If you try too much, you got to a little bit. If you don't push too hard, or you'll blow the whole deal. You put in a price too high, you won't get it. Tafasta muad. Take a little bit of the profit. Nobody can keep them all. But so David HaMelech came and he said, okay, don't worry about the other ones. Just worry about these mitzvot, these 11 mitzvot. Of course, these 11 mitzvot, by the way, are pretty much all between man and man, but that's a whole other discussion, maybe for Tishra. So this whole Gemara is very fascinating in a sense. And it's clear it's not really a literal idea, learning. I mean, the Gemara is, we need a lot more time to go, but just to throw out this amazing Gemara at the end of Makot, and that's the source of everything. And now you know why the Ramban is a little bit skeptical. So he goes along with it. Okay, there's 613 mitzvot. So so I'll quote there. There's one other Talmudic source that I'm aware of. I remember I said there were two. There's one other Talmudic source that says there's 613 mitzvot, and that's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. I told you the cute story on the Vilna Gaon, right? The Vilna Gaon, when he was 5 years old. Again, I don't know if any of these stories are true, but nobody says this about J. Kelman. I can guarantee you nobody will ever say this story about J. Kelman. When the Vilna Gaon was 5 years old, on the second day of Pesach, he took out a Masechet Shavuos, and he started to learn. Prepare for there's Pesachim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom HaSukkah, and Shavuos. So they told them, they smiled, all the older people smiled, the little baby Rabbi Eliyahu, nice, cute, precocious 5-year-old kid, but Rabbi Eliyahu, Eli, you don't know. Shavuos doesn't talk about the holiday of Shavuot. It talks about a Shvuah, talks about an oath, Shavuos, Shavuah, Neder Shvuah, not Shavuot, the holiday. So, that's very cute. And the Vilna Gaon got them one up. He says, of course I know that. What do you think I am? Of course I know that. So, I'm paraphrasing. I don't know what they said, but this is, Nishpa v'omei mihar Sinai. God made us take an oath at Mount Sinai. So the idea of Shavuos, taking an oath, the most important oath, is the oath to keep the Torah. So Masechet Shavuot is the most appropriate Masechet for Shavuot. And then he added in the Vilna Shas, I can't have a Shas from the Vilna Shas. It's called Vilna Shas, but Vilna Shas printed in the 1800s. So you can't say in the Vilna Shas. But I imagine in the Shas of the time of the Vilna Gaon, he says, there are 49 pages in Masechet Shavuot. Isn't that cute? There are 49 pages, like Sfiras Omer. That's the origin of Daf Yomi. Where do you think Daf Yomi comes from? Right? This story of the Vilna Gaon. Okay. Anyways, but that's there is no Masechet on Shavuot, but the discussion on the holiday of Shavuot is in Masechet Shabbat, the holiday. So let's just take a very quick look. This, to my knowledge, is the only other place where the Taryag Mitzvot is mentioned anywhere in the Gemara. So the Shabbat 87, everybody see it, or you're not blocked, right, by what I'm blocked with, right? So the Gemara says that Moshe Rabbeinu did 3 things on his own. A pretty wild Gemara. Let's see if I can get to the beginning. Kind of Rabbana. No, let's see. I don't want to. Moshe Rabbeinu, I don't like the way it's set up. Okay. Moshe Rabbeinu Hosif Yom Midato, that before they got the 10 commandments, or whatever you want to call them, Moshe, there's a debate. Did they get the 6th of Sivan, the 7th of Sivan, the 5th of Sivan? The how many days they have to prepare? So the Gemara wants to claim that Moshe added an extra day from God on his own. Moshe Midato. Moses added 1 day on his own. He didn't ask God's permission. The Tanya Shlosha Dvarim Asa Moshe Midato. 3 things Moshe did without asking God. V'Yiskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And after the fact, God, great job, Moshe. That was great. Hosif Yom Echad Midato. He added an extra day. Piresh Menesha, he's separating from his wife. That last of they complained, why did you separate from your wife? Vishavar haluchot, and he broke the tablets. God said, Yashakot, Yisharkot, Shishparta. So the Gemara goes through these three things. How do we know Moshe did this? It's also fascinating that Moshe did this on his own without asking God. God's right there. He's the rabbi. He can make decisions. Torah lo b'shamayim. I make decisions. Shavarta luchot. How did Moshe come up with this? Like, on what basis did he make these things unknown? Amar, Uma Pesach, here you go. Shuachan mit Taryag mitzvot. Having a core Paschal lamb is only one of the 613 Taryag mitzvot. Amrat Torah kol ben nechar lo yochabo. A foreigner, a non-Jew, is not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach. A Torah Kula, the entire Kula, the 613 mitzvot, Israel Meshumadim, and the Jewish people are apostatizing. That's a big thing here in Portugal, where the Inquisition and right, Israel are Meshumadim. Alachat kama kama. How much more so do I have to not give them the Torah? I can't give the Torah to a bunch of people worshiping an idol. Uminal these scheme Hakadosh Baruch. How do we know God agreed? And Amar Shershi Barta. God tells Moshe, write the Tov Lechat, what's the pasuk? Tov Lecha, something Taluchot Asher Shibarta.
Et Shira Hazot, no?
No, that's a different pasuk. This is in Perek Lamed Dalet, pasuk Aleph, I believe in Shmot. Tov Lecha at Ktav Lecha, you write at Taluchot Asher Shibarta, that you broke. V'amar Reish Lakish says a play on words. Shibarta Yishar Kochacha. Shibarta. Yashakoach, that you broke them. Anyways, so that's the only other reference that I'm aware of in the Talmud, that there's 613 mitzvot. Okay, in the few minutes that we have left, let's try to talk about this a little more. But everybody accepts it, as the Ramban writes, everybody who writes mitzvot assumes there's 613. So the first one I mentioned was the Bahag. You notice the Ramban alluded to that. I said I'd skip that paragraph. So I won't do it inside for the purposes of time, but the Bahag, I mentioned, one of the Gonim. So what are the first mitzvot? I said the Rambam writes that there's 613 mitzvot. The first principle is you don't count rabbinic mitzvot. So the Rambam says, I didn't have to tell you that. That's so obvious. Obviously, Torah, Tzibel, and Moshe. What God gave to Moshe, obviously, are biblical laws. Obviously, you don't count rabbinic laws in the 613 mitzvot. I don't make a whole principle, but I have to do it because there was this guy. He is such an Amma Aretz. He's the most ignorant rabbi I ever met in my life. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little, but actually, maybe I'm not exaggerating as much as I think. This rabbi thought that you can count rabbinic mitzvot as part of the Torah mitzvah. This rabbi, this Bahag, this Bala Halachot Gedolot, he counted Neiros Chanukah, Netilat Yadayim, Megillat Esther, making a bracha. He counted, I think he counted them as part of the Taryag mitzvot. Is he crazy? I can't believe anybody could do such a thing. The Rav Soloveitchik gave a whole Yortzeit shir, I believe 3-hour shir, explaining the position of the Bahag. Not that he agrees with the Bahag. That was the beauty of the Rav. The Rav would give you a 3-hour shir on Beit Shammai's opinion. We don't follow Beit Shammai, but who cares? In the world of the Brisker Torah, we're not care about practice. Torah is a description of God, emanations from God. So Beit Shammai, I don't care if we don't follow it. You have to understand Beit Shammai. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah applies equally to Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. I'll say another thing that Rav pointed out, right? You asked me for rabbinic and biblical mitzvah. I said, of course, the biblical mitzvah is more important. But let's say like this: you can study Hilchot Purim, or you can study Hilchot Shabbos. What has a greater mitzvah of Talmud Torah? To study Hilchot Shabbos, that's a biblical mitzvah, or to study Hilchot Purim, that's only rabbinic mitzvah. Where do you get the greater mitzvah for the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? Somebody, please say something. And therefore, what's greater? To learn Hilchot Shabbos, greater mitzvah of Talmud Torah? What do you think? Is it? I don't know. I only have an hour a day to learn. So I can learn about Ona, I can learn Lotignov, or I can learn about Chanukah. I can learn about the rabbinic custom to give the Meiser Ksapim. Let's assume that's only a rabbinic mitzvah to give 10%. Or I can learn about not to overcharge. That is a biblical mitzvah. So do I get a greater mitzvah of Talmud Torah if I learn about the biblical mitzvah? So you would think what?
Yes.
Yeah, so of course the answer is no, obviously, right? That's the rest said no, that's in practice. And when you go, yes, the biblical mitzvah, but once you're learning Torah, everything becomes a chefza of Torah. That's, I believe, how the Rav, that's his basically explaining the Bahag. A rabbinic mitzvah becomes part of the Torah, rabbinic explications of the Torah, lo kasur, the mitzvah to listen to the rabbi. There's no, right, so that there's no greater mitzvah of Talmud Torah to study Beit Hillel over Beit Shammai. To study Beit Shammai, even though we know from the beginning we're not going to follow Beit Shammai. To study Beit Shammai is the exact same mitzvah of Talmud Torah as there is to study Beit Hillel. Now, it could be that there's a separate distinction that the Briskers don't like, but Rav Schechter liked, to learn things that are practical and to learn things that are not practical, or halacha l'maisa. But that's not the same as Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. It's a little bit different. Like to learn whatever. Do you learn Shulchan Aruch or to learn Gemara? What's more important? So that you have many would say to learn halacha. Don't learn Gemara. Whatever it is. But I'm saying in Rav Soloveitchik developed this. It makes a lot. It has to be that way. When every time I'm going to learn Torah, this is only a rabbinic mitzvah. I don't want to learn about it. I want to get a higher mitzvah Talmud Torah. That's like insane. So yes, once it's part of Torah, it's a part of the mitzvah. When we give, I think it's a beautiful idea. When the rabbis say something in Torah, that becomes part of the Torah Moshe. It's the same mitzvah of Talmud Torah is learning what God said, the Ten Commandments. Whether God said it, Moshe said it, or Rabbi Akiva said it, or the Rambam said it, or even J. Kelman maybe, I don't know. Some says it, that becomes part of Torah, and that's the same mitzvah. I don't want to say by me, okay, by other people, whatever. So that's an interesting idea. So the Bahag, when he lists 630 mitzvot, includes 7 mitzvot that are rabbinic in nature. So you see already, this is like a fascinating topic. 630, I mean, you can, it's a topic for what the 630 mitzvot, but it's really such an I find it so interesting and fascinating. We don't have these agreed upon lists. The Rambam really rips the Bahag to shreds. As you know, the Rambam didn't mince words. The Rambam, it's why we don't follow the Rambam. He never quotes other opinions. That's the Rambam. That's the Rambam. He was great. It's a great, probably if I could meet any one rabbi in the last 2,000 years, it would probably be the Rambam. If I could go, who would I want to meet the most? Probably the Rambam. I don't have to think about it a little bit. Anyways. So that's really quite something. But but the assumption again, of course, we have 613 mitzvot. Now, what he didn't discuss. Okay, so let's discuss very briefly what's the difference between Torah shebichtav. What is the difference between something written in Torah and something derived from what's written in the Torah? The 39 malachot are not written in Torah. 38 of the malachot are not written in Torah. So what is the difference? In other words, why does it, or the original question they asked, why does it matter if there's 613 mitzvot? Why does it matter if something is counted as a mitzvot if we have to do it? I understand rabbinic and biblical, because rabbinic, if you're in doubt, you don't have to do. I get all that. But why do we do that? Why does it matter within biblical law? Within something written in the Torah and something that's derived from the Torah? Who cares? I have to observe the other 38 malachot. And you know what? In Sanhedrin, in theory, if you cook on Shabbos, they'll give you a death penalty. Of course, not in practice, but in theory, it doesn't say in Torah you can't cook. It's true. The rabbis derive it, but that's a biblical law. You violated the laws of Shabbat, death penalty. End of story, right? So why does it matter? Anybody?
Why does what matter?
Why does it matter if something is counted as one of the 613 mitzvot? Who cares? Who cares that cooking isn't? So this is an idea that I must say I've never seen this anywhere. It's my own idea, which means it may be totally wrong. I've asked a few people this question. No one's given me. Most people, I'm talking. I don't mean. When I ask people, I mean people who have learned, like are learned people. People, people. I haven't asked. I didn't ask Rav Shachta this question, but I've asked. Other learned people, very learned people. I come across, and I say to them, "Why does it matter?" And they're all stumped. They never really thought of the question. Like, who cares if it's one of the 613 mitzvot? We have to follow all the biblical law. Right? What difference does it make? So the answer, I think the answer, and everybody I've told this answer to, they haven't argued with me that I'm wrong. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that. So it's like this, because the basic thing is, and this I heard from Rav Shechter many, many times, is that when it comes to a drasha, when it comes to reading between the lines, that there are 39 melachot, it's true, it's a biblical law. There's a difference between rabbinic legislation and rabbinic interpretation. Rabbinic legislation, to have Purim, to have Hanukkah, Muksa, that's rabbinic legislation, not to eat chicken and milk. Those are all rabbinic law. The rabbis don't claim this is what the Bible says. The Bible doesn't say this. The Bible says you can eat chicken and milk. But we're going to put a fence because we're afraid you're going to make an error. But that's biblical legislation. That's rabbinic legislation. Everybody agrees that's rabbinic law. Rabbinic interpretation, when it says in the Torah, keep Shabbat, the Torah doesn't tell us how to keep Shabbat. So the rabbi said, this is what the Torah means. So that's Torah law. When you learn Shakespeare and say, this is what Shakespeare means. So that's what Shakespeare says. It's not like that's what he didn't use those words. He doesn't have to use those words. Poetry, you allude to words. The Torah is poetry. The Torah self-describes itself as poetry. So the Torah doesn't, as rabbinic interpretation becomes biblical law. So there should be no difference. What's between biblical interpretation and what the Bible says? The difference is, Shakespeare. You can have two English professors who disagree. Was Merchant of Venice anti-Semitic or not, right? Whatever I am, I can disagree on everything in Shakespeare. I told you the story once with Rabbi Riskin when he was, I believe, at Hebrew University in the early 60s. So he took a course in Hebrew literature, and at the end they were doing a piece on Agnon, and they had to analyze some story of Agnon, and they presented it. 3 people presented, I guess, the paper on Agnon, and Agnon was sitting in the audience. Shai Agnon was sitting in the audience. So each person gave 3 different interpretations. So they asked Shai Agnon, which one is right? And Shai Agnon smiled. And I don't know if he knew or again. And when they went to Rav Soloveitchik, and they asked the Rav Soloveitchik after his fancy explanations of the Rambam, this is a little bit different, but it's the same idea. Do you think the Rambam really meant that? Do you think the Rambam really meant what you said, that whole long thing? And Rav Soloveitchik says, it doesn't matter. If you can interpret that in the Rambam, it's good enough. If you can interpret that to me, Rambam means, that's fine. We'll leave that to the side, but we know interpretations vary. So the same thing is in Torah. What do you machloket all the time? Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Shmuel, we just saw 3 arguments. So interpretations vary. So we today accept the notion that there are 39 melachot. But let's say you have a Beit Din that says there are only 28 melachot or 44 melachot. So you know what? The law is going to change. The reason people don't think like this is because for the last 2,000 years, or for the last 200 years, I want to say in Reform Judaism, we have all been taught the Torah never changes, right? Everybody's been taught that. So yes, the words of the Torah never change, but the interpretation of the Torah change all the time. We today don't have the power to uninterpret or reinterpret the way the Talmud interprets something. Why we don't have that power is for another shiur, but that's the assumption. But in theory, when we have a Sanhedrin, that's why people want to recreate a Sanhedrin. That's why in 1948, Yehuda Leib Maimon wanted to recreate it. We have a Jewish state now. We have to look at the Torah anew. We lived 1900 years without applying these laws. We got to bring the Torah up to the modern world within a halachic framework, of course. People are very pious, very learned. We're not talking about, to make it easy. We just have to apply into a modern state. But you need a Sanhedrin. You need a real Sanhedrin to do that. So if you had a real Sanhedrin, they can reinterpret the Torah. So it could be that when we have a Sanhedrin, there won't be 39 melachot on Shabbos. And it could be, there'll be there'll be less, it could be there'll be more. They'll derive it from another source, and this is true in every mitzvah. You have this in the Gemara all the time. Mishnah Rishona, Mishnah Achrona. The early sages said this, and the latest, no, we disagree. And the halacha follows the later sages, where everybody you're allowed to anybody who's authoritative enough can disagree. So therefore, it's very important. That's why the Rambam makes a big deal. Anything because the Rambam is the Torah can never change, of course. And so the Rambam says any one of the 13 that's derived from the 13 principles, that's interpretation, that can't be a mitzvah because mitzvot are permanent. The 630 Torah Tziva Alenu Moshe, the Torah that God gave to us, is permanent and never changing. It's the essence of God. God never changes. It's perfect. It cannot change one iota. That's what I mean. Be quote unquote an Orthodox Jew, right? But the interpretations of the Torah, that can change. So if the interpretation of the Torah can change, that can't be one of the 613 mitzvot. So I think why is it important? The 613 mitzvot means it's permanent, la'olam ba'ad, forever. And everything else, now we've been following this everything else for 2,000 years without changing it. That's why it's a little bit tricky. So that's why I think otherwise, who cares if something is part of the 613 mitzvah? Okay, there's a lot more to discuss, but it's 157 where you are and 657 where I am. And so let's just do a very quick review. And please God, we'll see you next week, 9:30 a.m. at our regular time, back on the Siddur and back in the middle of Shema. But I do greatly appreciate all of you who did come at the, I very much appreciate it. I know I'm not in your regular schedule, but at least in the summer, hopefully it's a little bit easier. Okay, we raised the question, where do we know there's 613 mitzvot? So the rabbis in the Talmud, and the Mishnah, this was no concern. They never ever mentioned it. It's mentioned in 2 places in the Talmud. Both are agadic statements. They're not legal statements. And the Ramban says the Gemara never takes them seriously. Because when Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel argue, is this a mitzvah? The Gemara never asked, well, what about, where's he going to fill the mitzvah? So the Gemara never took the discussion so seriously. There's some agadic position, and we see even how they derive it is very strange. 6:11 and 2, it's not really 2, because really the first 2 commandments are really 4 mitzvot, and maybe God said all of them, and the context of the Gemara is not about Taryag mitzvot, it's about 6:11, 6:13, 11, 6, 3, 1. It's about how Torah sort of evolved over the generation, not so much teaching us, but no, that we have that concept. Then we have the concept that by Moshe Rabbeinu breaking the luchot, because the Jews were not, by doing avodah zarah, they violated all 613 mitzvot. And the Ramban says, even though I'm I'm not so sure there's 613 mitzvot, but every single person who counts the mitzvot came at 613, and I'm going to go with that, even though I'm going to disagree with the Rambam what the count are. And then I'm explaining why is this important. Who cares that there's 600 mitzvot? In other words, this is now making them into something important, at least based on the Rambam, is because anything that's 613 mitzvah means that can't change. That be or the fact that the Rambam says the way we count 613 mitzvah is only things that are written in the text itself and not biblical interpretation, because interpretations can change. We may not have that authority, but please God, we will one day. And the Torah might look very different, and people find this is not unorthodox. This is tradition. I mean, Orthodox is untraditional. That's also whatever. I don't want to. It's a whole other this discussion. That's whatever. Everything. The modern world changed things. So on denominations, that's not a Jewish concept. There's one Torah. No, I'm a Reformed Jew. I don't have to keep that. That's ridiculous. Jews are Jews. We all have the Torah. Some people give less of Torah. Some people give more. This is modern terms. Unfortunate. It would be better to live in a post-denominational age. You have Jews less like in Lubavitch, that's the greatness of Chabad, that they're Jewish people, we're all one. They don't, anyways, okay. But that's how the Ramban says why it's important. We have so many of the 14 categories. We didn't discuss really, we have to discuss within the Torah, there's different levels, written Torah interpretations, takana, minhagim, and please, maybe one day, maybe when I travel again, we can continue. But thank you very much. I see there's a hand up. Fruma, you want to ask something? Bavakasha.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the right question, if I understood you correctly, but I just wanted to ask you, I was just thinking, because I just listened to a lecture by Herschel Schachter recently, do you think that he would say that the significance of the 613 midaraisa, let's say whatever they are, since there's different opinion as to what they are, that their significance is in the implementation in terms of prohibition, that the prohibition of one of the 613 is a sort of more serious than a prohibition of a rabbinical.
Right. So I'm not saying that. Maybe I'm saying a biblical interpretation has the same status if something's written in the Torah itself. We will give somebody, in theory, a death penalty for writing on Shabbat or cooking. The difference is that an interpretation can change over time, and what's written in the Torah can't. So in that sense, something written in the Torah is of higher significance. Or if you want to get in halachic terms, it has an extra kedusha. I know the letters of the Torah, that's a whole different idea. But so what I'm saying is we assume biblical interpretation is biblical law. It has the same status, and that's why there are millions of mitzvot. They're not 613 mitzvot. But
I was only talking about
the interpretation.
I wasn't talking about learning. Yeah.
By learning, there's no difference even between rabbinic mitzvot and biblical mitzvot. To learn, you learn Hilchot Chanukah, you fulfill the biblical mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see somebody's writing a whole thing about Salazar and Portugal and the dictatorship. Portugal was neutral during World War II. I'm not reading the whole thing. I've just read Portugal. If you got to Portugal, you were saved. We went to the museum yesterday. Mendes saved 30,000 people. He got arrested, and they made his life miserable after that. And after he died, they resurrected him. But you got to Portugal, your life was saved. Nobody died in the Holocaust who made it to Portugal, including the Lubavitcher Rebbe who made it to Portugal. Portugal stood alone, right? Grounding rights, right? Okay, paradoxically, a country that many Jews can it was a fascist state. It was a dictatorship during the war. That's the crazy thing, right? It was. Salazar, till 74. Portugal only became a democracy in 1974. But this was the place to get to. If you could get here in World War II, your life was saved. Okay, a mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. Rabbis were not to state, that's true, not to state that one mitzvah is more important than another unless you fail to observe that. Yeah, you shouldn't state that, but mitzvot, some are more important than the others. That's what we said. They took out the Aseret that he brought, so people didn't say the most important, but we know they're more important, less mitzvot. 248 organs of the body. There are vital organs and less vital organs. And eating on Yom Kippur is a greater punishment. Violating Shabbat, you get a death penalty. Even eating on Yom Kippur, you don't get a death penalty. So clearly some mitzvot are more important. We should treat them, when the rabbis say, heavy zar b'mitzvah kalak, or pretend, treat a light mitzvah like an important mitzvah. Means it's not as important, but you should pretend it's as important. In our attitude towards it, it should be very important. But if there are conflicts, you have to know what you can do.
You want to come to it? Oh, sorry.
So in theory, if we become very, very strict, like the current Islamic rulers, Jews could enforce the mitzvot with esteem. I sure hope not. No, that's another discussion. No, I don't. I mean, I think that would be terrible. I think what the rabbis are saying is that we don't want to get that. But you're right. The biblical law says, but that the rabbis minimize that. I would hope that would never change. I would hope the rabbis wouldn't become like that. But you never know. Listen, unfortunately, we're living in a world of extremism, and you see it in the Jewish world too. And I'm not happy about that. But okay, 613 are categories. That is true. That's a whole other discussion. All the time it's going to be placed. Yeah, okay. If you can't place it within the 613, okay, that could be. But then the question becomes, why are those 613? Why are those the ones that are important? The true matter, the Sajak Goen says something else. He said the 613 mitzvot, the 10 commandments, Aseret Dibrot are categories. And each one of the 613 mitzvot can be placed in the Aseret Dibrot. I'm not sure people, so he even goes a step further, that everything emanates from the Aseret Dibrot. But it's something, okay, I have to think about that. I think what you're saying, there is a lot to what you're saying, Zoom user. But they have to say why these and not those, but I hear you. Thank you. Everyone agrees on the 39. Yeah, today everybody agrees on the 39. I thought the latest rabbis, I understand totally what you're saying, right? For 2,000 years, there's a hesitancy change. I totally get all that. I'm not talking that world, but if let's say we're back in the Talmud, there were debates. There were debates about all these things, and then the halacha got codified. It really depends who becomes the members of our Sanhedrin. I think people will tell you that with a state of Israel, you need radical changes in halacha. Like Rav Herzog was more. I mean, I'm not an expert in this. Rav Herzog believed that we really have to reevaluate. That doesn't sound good. Rav Herzog was very committed to halacha, but there's certain things we do. Like Rav Herzog said, we're bound by the United Nations. We can't go destroying churches.
Not anymore.
You can see how an extremist rabbi could say that Jews should destroy all churches in Israel. It's not so hard to find sources in the Torah to say such a thing. God forbid we would do such a thing. That would be terrible. That'd be terrible. Okay, maybe you consider me unorthodox. Okay, fine. I'm guilty as charged, if that's what makes one orthodox. But Rav Herzog said, we can't do that. We're part of the nation of the world. There's certain norms. So we know there's certain things. The rabbis already did away with certain mitzvot. They did away with certain things. You don't have to. That's how did they do that? But so I'm not convinced that now it's very hard to imagine rabbis obviously changed 39 malachot. When we have a real Sanhedrin and the Jewish people are united and work, and we have real problems, we're going to solve the Aguna crisis. A real Sanhedrin could solve the Aguna crisis. They can, they didn't have people 2,000 years ago who wouldn't give their way to get. Because if they did, the Beit Din would force them or even kill them. The Rambam says you can give a person a death penalty. So we can't do that. So that they had other methods to solve. We don't have those methods today. So the rabbis would have to recreate them, but we don't have that Sanhedrin. Okay, so anyways, but okay, it is getting late. I have to make Shabbos soon, actually, 45 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Yom Canada Sameach. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And okay, please God, we will see you all next week, 9:30 at our regular time. And Shabbat Shalom and all the best. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.